Hey folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Let's discuss and unpack natal sun square Neptune in the birth chart. So as usual, when we are discussing these aspects, we cover just a little bit of astrological ground first to sort of warm up our astrological brain. So stay with me for a second. Now, any aspect between the sun and Neptune is actually invoking a set archetypal relationship, and we look to the zodiac to help us to understand the archetypal relationship that we're dealing with. So in this case, the sun governs the sign of Leo. Leo is the sun's home sign, and using a modern take on rulerships and looking at where Neptune is most comfortable in terms of expressing its essential energies, Neptune governs the sign of Pisces and is strongly affiliated with that sign. So when we're looking at any aspect between the sun and Neptune, we are invoking the archetypal relationship between Leo and Pisces. And when we refer to the zodiac, we know that Leo and Pisces are 5 signs apart, 150 degrees. And we know that the angular relationship of 150 degrees corresponds to what is called the inconjunct or the quincunx. So the archetypal relationship between the sun and Neptune is that of the inconjunct or the quincunx, as symbolic of how far apart Leo and Pisces are. So the sort of classic understanding of the quincunx, and by the way, I have a video on quincunxes here on the channel, is that the classic understanding is that with the planets in the quincunx, the planets have nothing in common, either elementally, fire, air, earth, water, or by modality, cardinal, fixed, mutable, or polarity, masculine, feminine. So with Leo and Pisces, there is nothing in common by element. We have fire, that's Leo, and water, that's Pisces. And we have a fixed sign, that's Leo, and a mutable sign, that's Pisces. And Pisces is feminine and yin, and Leo is masculine and yang. So we're seeing that archetypally, there is an existing fundamental tension between the needs and motivations of Pisces and the needs and motivations of Leo. They are very different elementally and by modality. So with Leo, we seek personal recognition for our uniqueness, what makes us special, our individual creative self-expression. And the very nature of Pisces, on the other hand, is to transcend or dissolve the individual ego. So Pisces does not privilege the individual as a unique or separate or distinct entity, but seeks to sort of merge and reconnect the individual consciousness with source or all that is, or whatever your framework is personally. So Pisces as a principle is concerned with that. So with Pisces as a principle, we are less attached to our identity as a distinct individual, while with Leo, we are celebrating and recognizing the individual in this very, very heightened kind of way. So Leo is just this consciousness of the individual's uniqueness, their unique specialness. So Leo and Pisces have basic tensions in terms of their realms of operation. So with the planets, the sun is the conscious ego, and Neptune represents the realm that is beyond the conscious control of the ego. So with the sun, there is conscious control and conscious direction of the will. And with Neptune, we are often asked to surrender to something that is vastly bigger than us, which often undermines our conscious intentions. So the inconjunct or quincunx represents the archetypal relationship, but we're not talking about a quincunx or an inconjunct. We're talking about a square, natal sun square Neptune. And we know that squares are aspects of dynamic tension. So the square aspect will definitely amplify the already existing archetypal tension between these two planets, the Sun and Neptune. Now, with planets in a square, we have an elemental disharmony, so to speak. So we know, for example, that planets in fire signs are square planets in water signs. Planets in water signs are square planets in air signs. Planets in earth signs are square planets in air signs. So the planets in a square don't have this sort of elemental harmony. The planets really have to work and really put in effort into working together and integrating the energy. Yeah, so that's the nature of the square. So work has to go into productively using these planetary energies. So squares can kind of have this very frustrated, thwarted tone. There is this heightened state of internal tension, and it can kind of feel like the energy is thwarted or frustrated in some kind of way. So on one level, the person with Sun squared Neptune can find it challenging to productively integrate the energies of their Sun with the energies of Neptune. It's challenging to get them to work together. Neptune can often thwart the person's conscious aims. The person may find that they are constantly having to negotiate with forces that are beyond their personal conscious control. So squares represent in the chart where we have the work to do to bring two facets of the psyche into a more constructive working relationship. That's the nature of the evolutionary task with a square. So with the Sun square Neptune, the individual may find that they have to really work at finding a healthy integration point between the Sun and Neptune. So where the Sun and Neptune are at odds with each other, the evolutionary task of the square is to work to find a way of better harmonizing the conscious will, as symbolized by the Sun, and what is beyond the person's conscious control, as symbolized by Neptune. So with Sun square Neptune, the life theme is work on navigating the tension between what is in my conscious control and what is not in my conscious control. Where does my ego stop? Where does it begin? Where do I have to submit to something that is larger than I am? Where do I cooperate with it? How can I get on board with it? And in general, Sun Neptune people often have to negotiate where they stop and where other people begin. And it's a very interesting thing where Sun Neptune people are concerned, especially with the harder, more dynamic aspects like the square. We often see that they deal with strange illnesses that are kind of hard to identify, or they are kind of susceptible to colds and infections, things like that. So what is happening on a deeper level is that because they have, Sun Neptune people have a more heightened seed knowing of the connection between themselves and others and creation, people, plant, animal, a heightened seed knowing. Sun Neptune people are often doing psychic house cleaning wherever they go. They kind of pick up debris from others in a kind of unconscious attempt to transmute this sort of energy, this debris. So they take on the psychic material of other people, and this manifests in the body as strange little illnesses that are kind of hard to pinpoint or identify. So of course, a key task for Sun Neptune people in general, not just with the square, is to develop healthy Saturnian boundaries where the physical body is itself contained in the kind of Saturnian sense of having its own contained space, the body having its own contained space. And that is, of course, the realm of Saturn, the integrity of the body as its own self-contained structure. So, having that sense of a boundary, even when there is an inner psychic knowing and understanding and sense of their connection to all of life. So there has to be this Saturnian integrity of the individual human form as its own distinct entity. So for the Sun square Neptune person, the basic challenge here is having a healthy ego in operation. They may try to deny their personal ego, ironically over-identifying with Neptune in such a way that their ego is actually caught up with denying or denouncing the ego. Yeah, it's kind of paradoxical there. So we have often with Sun square Neptune, heightened tendencies of being excessively self-sacrificial. The person becomes so caught up in the identity of being all loving, all forgiving, trying to approximate these Neptunian states that the person ends up giving over the self and giving up all the rights of the individual self in ways that are very problematic. So the very denial or denouncing of the ego and the self results in an unhealthy ego expression. The thing with squares is that we often have this too much or too little dynamic. So we may have someone with a Sun Neptune square who is excessively self-sacrificial. They don't know their own worth and they may underrate themselves, and this is sort of applicable to Sun Neptune interchanges in general. There is a tendency to hide the self in such a way that they do not want the spotlight or attention because of a core feeling that to have the spotlight or attention on them is self-centered. You're gone too much in the individual ego, which is what they're kind of trying to avoid, which becomes a paradox if we're living here on Earth, right? So the Sun Neptune person can play down or obfuscate their abilities, resisting too much personal recognition. Again, with the square, it's what we are resisting. So they're resisting too much personal recognition because within their psyche, personal recognition, that's the Sun, and Leo, the Sun-Leo matrix, that is linked or tied up with guilt or some other Neptunian belief or feeling state. So that's the kind of too little dynamic of the square. You know what I'm saying? So on the other hand, we may find a situation in which the Sun negatively co-opts Neptune for very self-centered, egocentric ends. So we find someone with a grossly inflated sense of self, Sun square Neptune, delusions of grandeur, a savior complex, overrating the self, a dynamic in which the person does not have a realistic appraisal of themselves, a realistic view of themselves. So this applies to Sun Neptune aspects across the board. The challenge of having a realistic view of the self with Sun Neptune in opposition. This is playing out a lot in the context of relationships, right? And we can do a separate video on Sun opposite Neptune and kind of dig into that oppositional dynamic there. But this business of having a realistic view of the self with Sun squared Neptune and Sun Neptune aspects in general, the self-image is distorted in such a way that the person has a very warped sense of their identity. Neptune can do that. It's kind of like looking into a mirror that kind of warps or distorts your features. So the Sun square Neptune person, as an example, may feel that, they're here to save the world. And only they can do that because they're chosen or special. A sort of self-deception in that kind of way. And that's the too much expression of the square. So with the square, you can have this warped sense of ego going in any direction, too much or too little. Either I am denouncing and denying myself, resisting the solar expression, resisting the Sun, with excessive humility, or, you know, on the other end, I think I'm the best thing since macaroni cheese was invented. So it's that kind of thing, too much or too little. So the energy of the square can have this very frustrated tone. The square symbolically represents a state of being where it's challenging to regulate the energy. So it spews off in all sorts of directions, and that manifests in the individual as inappropriate actions or inappropriate emotional responses. So the core issue is a lack of integration of the energy. It's discordant, not smooth, spewing off into all kinds of directions and kind of unregulated. That's a tone of the square, if we could describe it in one sense. So the work for people with squares in their chart, as I've said, is to learn to sort of smooth out the energy. And as I'm saying this, I brought the card along, the Temperance card in the tarot. Can you see it here? Yeah. So, you know, this card, this archetype comes to mind in terms of harmonizing and smoothing out the energies. You see the Angel of Temperance with two chalices in each hand, one in each hand, and we have this smooth flow between the water between the cups there. So it's very regulated and smoothed out. So that's the work when they're squares, to learn how to harmonize and smooth out the energy where there is discord. Yeah. So planets in a square often resist each other. And if the person identifies more with their sun as symbolic of their conscious will or ego, they may resist or deny their Neptunian side. So you may find someone who is very suspicious of anything that represents a connection to superconscious states or the intangible realms. Yeah, they may resist the spiritual and psychic dimensions of Neptune, even though, as indicated by the aspect, they need to establish a relationship or a rapport with those Neptunian realms for them to find creative fulfillment and happiness. Whenever a planet is in aspect with another planet, it means that the planets cannot execute their respective functions without taking the other planet into account. So if the sun is in aspect to Neptune, the sun needs Neptune to carry out its solar function. So in this instance, we may find someone who is denying their Neptunian side in whatever way that could manifest. They may deny their imagination or creative or spiritual pursuits. Now, as we said, squares also have this tone of needing accomplishment. And again, we may think of this in terms of the zodiac. So from the Aries 0 point, Capricorn represents the closing square, the final 90 degrees on the way back down to Aries. So many squares can have this underlying Capricorn feel, regardless of what signs they're in. The archetypal tone of squares are either Cancer, opening square, or Capricorn, closing square. With the Capricornian feel, there is the need to work to achieve and accomplish something. So we may find someone with Sun Neptune talents, imagination, creativity, heightened musical abilities, psychic receptivity, working to achieve or accomplish something with their talents and abilities. Yeah, actively working to create these sorts of sublime, transcendent states of beauty or musical expression, and the need to accomplish something with this. And an example here is pianist Frédéric Chopin. And I listened to a lot of classical music growing up, so I've always enjoyed Chopin. And I recall watching a documentary about Chopin, and when I heard the details of his life, I was like, yeah, I have to look up his birth information. And as it turns out, Chopin had the sun at 10 degrees of Pisces, square Neptune at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. So there's much to the story there in terms of Chopin. in terms of his chart. But of course, that is beyond the scope of this video. But we could do a video looking at his chart and just kind of going through the life themes and going through and exploring the life themes and relating it back to these Sun Neptune themes and expressions. So it's always interesting with these people. We have the almost transcendental, otherworldly creativity that they express in their art forms, but with this kind of melancholy about the human experience, a profound sense of sadness about being in the world. So Sun Neptune people, on a whole, a part of their purpose is to express in human form, to be messengers for the higher frequential states of the soul and spirit. Yeah, so music and art, these Neptunian expressions, are easy vehicles for this because they allow for the communication of non-linear data, non-linear frequencies, non-linear frequential states into the physical realm. So music and art represent, in literal terms, the closest we can get to certain dimensional frequencies while we are in a human body on Earth. And it stirs our soul because in many instances, music conveys the frequencies of our home soul states, and when we're not in a body, and those states of course are all symbolized by Neptune. So on a broader psychological level, the Sun square Neptune person is in the process of doing the inner psychological work as symbolized by the square, to experience the serenity, higher spiritual purpose, sense of peace, connection to the divine, spiritual bliss, compassion and love, vision, intuition, sensitivity, openness, receptivity, inspiration, and creativity that the Sun Neptune people need. So they're doing that work to achieve those states. So they're in the process of putting in the psychological work to experience more of those states, which represent the more integrated expressions of the Sun Neptune interchange. So because on a deep level, Sun Neptune people are in the sort of paradoxical position of trying to sense that spiritual bliss and all-encompassing connection to spirit or to source or whatever you want to call it, while in a human body, while navigating the human experience. They can be particularly susceptible to needing to find an escape route where they can experience those states. And that's where things like substance use or addiction come in. The mind-altering states associated with substance use allows Sun Neptune people to tap into a world where temporarily they are free from identifying with their limited identities as human personalities. So they can become addicted to these altered states of consciousness, which they get through substance use. So we have an addiction, or we have addiction as an unconscious substitute for mystical experience. Yeah. So Sun Neptune people, and especially with the more challenging or dynamic aspects like the square, can really find it challenging to be in a human body. So there is a tendency to really want to escape life, especially the facets of life that are kind of an affront to the soul. So these are some of the essential tones of Sun square Neptune. We have conscious life in a body and the individual identity as symbolized by the sun at odds with the higher spiritual states and realms of Neptune. So a lot of the core challenges that people with Sun square Neptune have can be linked back to this very core, fundamental, very basic tension. So it's helpful to go back to the root of these archetypes, to understand and to see how they are stacking up with each other. And I'm about to put out a very meaty audio class on aspects. We're going to go really in depth to a core, deep understanding of aspects at various levels. Yeah. And I'm really excited about putting this up in my store. It will be in the store section of my website, which is taranikita.com. And as always, if you'd like some help to decode the Sun Neptune in your chart, I'm here for astrological counseling consultations, which are available at my website as well. And links to that can be found in the description box below. Yeah. So thanks for watching, folks, and hope this was helpful. Talk soon. Until next time, bye.